Good morning everyone, welcome to the next Revolt session. My name is Gus Murray and I'm the Managing Director here at Revolt, and today we're going to be speaking with Steffen Frølund from GreenMobility. Steffen is the CMO at GreenMobility and we're going to have a discussion around growing green enterprises. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments thread below and we'll try and get to them either during or after the show. Otherwise, I'd like to welcome Steffen to the stage. Welcome, Steffen, to Revolt Sessions.
Thanks.
Would you just like to quickly introduce yourself to the audience and then maybe introduce GreenMobility?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Steffen. I'm the CMO of GreenMobility, and my background is I have a master's degree from Copenhagen Business School in Innovation and Business Development. I've always been super interested in like the intersection between technology and marketing, and at some point during my studies, like the internet and startups and all that sort of appeared to me as maybe the place for me to go. So I created a business. I was the first employee in a ticketing company in Copenhagen called Billetto, and that got my like first little baptism into what it is to be inside a startup. And that founding team had like an overlapping group of people that also did the first Danish deal site called Downtown. And that sort of initiated my own starting business adventure that put me on the map, and that was Bounty, which was sort of like a Momondo business model, but for deal sites like Groupon, Sweet Deal, Downtown, all that. And I was the CEO and founder of that for 5 years. Since then, I've been with the rainmaking. I've headed up a department that created ventures together with corporates. A job portal and an insurance app I've been involved in trying to start, and all that kind of stuff. And then I ventured back into doing a business again. I invested a little bit of my own money into business and joined that, an attempt to do a home loan. And while I was there, I got the invitation to join GreenMobility, which I've been with for a year and a half almost now.
Oh, perfect. And can you give a little bit of an overview or description of who GreenMobility are?
Yeah.
And sort of what you guys do.
Yeah, so GreenMobility is a 4.5-year-old company. We run a fleet of electrical cars that you can share out on the street. It's basically the same business model as Voi or Tier and the electrical kick scooters, but with cars. We started off in Copenhagen, and we started off with relatively few cars. And since we've expanded to have more than 1,000 cars now, we just launched city number 8 last week, which was Brussels. So in Copenhagen, which was where we were at the first 3.5 years of the company's life. Since then, also when I joined, it was part of a strategy change where we wanted to expand internationally and get like a real growth engine going. A curious fact about GreenMobility is like we were only a year old, I think, when the company was listed publicly on First North, which, I mean, it's a little bit weird direction to take a young business in, but it's been really, really good for a car business because there's so much in terms of trust and public affairs and how you interact with the municipalities and larger partners that was like really, really positively inflicted about the publicity of being a listed company.
Yep. Super. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about green enterprises. We've seen a lot of them coming up now, both from a point of view of being born green versus others that are tapping into green technologies or more sustainable goals and ambitions through UN SDGs. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys, from your perspective, see the marketplace and how consumers are and some of the trends around sort of green enterprises in that respect?
Absolutely. There's a ton to unpack here, so we can just start one place and we can dive into it. First of all, GreenMobility is sort of like in the name. It was launched with the intent to change how we use mobility in the cities a little bit differently. Obviously, sharing cars has some benefits, like in congestion and pollution or whatever. Even just freeing up parking spaces that can be used for parks or other buildings, gas stations. There's a lot on that, just that axis. But also electrical cars, they will have a lesser impact on CO2 emissions, of course. So it was launched with the intent to be a little bit more intelligent about how we do our transportation needs in a green and more sustainable way. but also in a way where it shouldn't be more expensive or more inconvenient or something like that. We wanted to unite, or I say we, I joined later on, but the idea was to unite the very capitalistic goals with the very sustainable goals. And I think that's where a lot of businesses can be struggling. Like maybe their product is not necessarily born green in a way where it facilitates the core product. Maybe it's something you need to add, or a supply chain you need to change, or a communication you need to do something about. But in our business, it's sort of out of the box what it is. An electric car that we share is better than a gasoline car that you drive yourself.
And how have you guys seen the response to that in terms of, I mean, obviously you guys started in Copenhagen and have grown from there. How has that trend and as a business driver worked for you guys?
Yeah, so that's just a wave we can ride on. Like more and more consumers are aware of how their transportation needs should be done differently, and also a ton of different regulatory incentives that are coming in, like free parking in Copenhagen for electrical vehicles on the street, charging infrastructure becoming better and better. In some cities, even subsidies for cars when we buy them or lease them. So there are a lot of things going on in terms of consumers' awareness and what it is. I think it's getting more and more to be a deciding factor between options. If they're equally convenient or inconvenient, and if they're equally priced almost, then to some extent you'd always just choose the green factor. So we have this little add-on in comparison with our competitors. Or the alternatives could just be taking the train or your bike or your own car. And in many cases, it's a game of convenience in our business. Like the nearest option, the easiest one, the one that shows up in your app that shows which way you should move to get to your destination. All of that stuff is super important. And also different cities will have different places that they're on that curve. Like in Sweden, they're super aware really early on that they were super aware on all the green stuff. We all know Greta Thunberg and also the name Flyskam. Flight shame now, that they're really, really aware of taking the train instead of flying. So that's really, really positive for us in the Swedish cities. And maybe in Belgium, where we're also at, they're in a different phase there, but it's also coming.
And do you guys target to a specific niche audience, or how do you guys communicate to your core audience that way?
Yeah, so it's important that the convenience of having a smarter way of transporting yourself in the city is not something for only green pioneers or Greta Thunberg types. It's also for you and me. That's just like a little bit aware of what we're doing, but like still not wholly about it. And that's how it should be, and that's what we're catering to. So we're doing mass market communications to large audiences. Obviously, you need to be above 18 to have a driver's license. I think our oldest customer is 94, so pretty old. We should do more about that situation. Actually, that's quite a fun fact. But the majority of the people using us is like urban people, young people. Maybe they don't even have a car. Maybe they only have a need for half a car. And then again, it's interesting because we have like these little suburban areas, I would say, with people having maybe one car and the family only needs 1.5. So what do they do? Do they lease 2, or what's the next one? And that's also a very, very interesting place for us to get into. So that's a little bit of an older audience, let's say 35 plus for that.
And you talk a little bit about the green, what do you call it, anecdote with like the holier than thou like element. Can you talk a little bit more about that whole mentality and that sort of what do you call it, danger zone for more sustainable or green brands in that way?
Absolutely. So yeah, as you say, that's one of the big issues that we have when we communicate. Like we are in a position to be. We can be a little bit holy to listen to, like when we say green and we are better than the gasoline car. And first of all, that can be off-putting for some. Like I'm not a bad person just because I drive a gasoline car, a lot of people say, and just shun us away a bit from that. But on the other hand, we also have like attacks from the other side. So we're never really green enough. And I have a couple of anecdotes with that. Like one would be, we have a great parking space, a hotspot we call it, in the airport of Copenhagen, where you can go, and that's like really, really used when airline traffic is still a thing. Hopefully that will come back. But and then we have a lot of people actually on their own just spontaneously criticizing us for incentivizing or being part of the airline industry. So we will be suffering a little bit from Flyskam, which is an interesting thing, even though probably the trip with the airline would have happened either way, and they would have taken a gasoline Mercedes taxi instead. So hopefully we're doing a little bit better, but we will be attacked from it. And there's even a little a little tension about how much should we talk about all the other green stuff that has nothing to do with driving. It could be vegetarianism, it could be anything else. That's also an interesting thing. And then when we launched Aarhus, that was before my time, but it could have been me deciding it easily, that we pulled some marketing over the bicycle seats, which was made of plastic. And actually more than a handful of different people contacted us that was students there saying, like, how does that even correspond to being a green brand, putting out plastic in the city environment, which was just like an eye-opener of like, how should you also not do stuff? So we always get attacked from both sides, which is quite interesting.
And how do you guys balance that sort of, okay, we have a need to grow the brand and grow our products, and we want to move to the airport because that'll offer our existing customers new availability or convenience. Also with traditional marketing tactics or campaigns or usage of things, like how do you guys, is that, do you take that on board and now use that as a like solid feedback, or how does that work?
Absolutely. So let's say the bike seats thing, we will never do that again for sure. I mean, that had some sense to it. But on the other hand, if that could have gotten 100 more people in Aarhus to drive electrical cars, it could have been a net benefit. So that's also how we always look at it. Are we doing something better relative to where things would have been otherwise? So we're not greenest mobility, we're green mobility. It's like, can we move the needle a little bit all the time by changing some behaviors, making it more easy, whatever? Then I think then I'm at least confident and happy that we're doing the right thing. We could always have taken it a step further. I mean, in the end, if you wanted to be the greenest mobility, we'd even remove the mobility part and you just stay at home. And that doesn't make sense either, right? So we need to live and do our things and have a society that works.
Green walking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, and what about in terms of like how much is the purpose side of what you guys do inherent in the actual organization?
Yeah.
Are you guys like, do you use for example, the UN SDGs as a yardstick? Do you talk about different sustainable goals within the organization? Like how is that used internally? Yeah,
so the like different stakeholder pressures for that, like obviously there's the internal one, like what can we do to support the brand, like live the brand. So we're encouraged to use our own cars as much as possible, of course, and we think a lot about what do we order on our lunch stuff, and we have I would say, compared to the general population, we probably have a large degree of vegetarianism and veganism at the office, just as a little curious fact. We also obviously from other stakeholders, investors, as a publicly listed company, ESG and SDG reporting is just super more important than ever before, and that's something we invest a lot in to do right. We just in December we changed from First North to the actual main market of NASDAQ in Copenhagen, and with that transition comes a lot more regulatory stuff and reporting requirements. And so for the first time before launching or publicizing our annual report, we also wanted to do a big sustainability report with that. So we went above and beyond what was expected with that, and I think that was really, really cool as well. And what else? Like stakeholders all around. We have this holier than thou from our consumers issue. We have obviously municipalities have some requirements on how we do things, and obviously we couldn't get a subsidy in one of the cities we were going to launch if it was a gasoline car. So that's all intertwined. And do you guys feel a increased pressure to go beyond because you guys are green and have that in your name, and you are getting slack from different consumer groups and stakeholders to pull up your up your act, so to speak? I think it's more of it's probably not so much an expectation thing that we want to beat. It's probably more like we wanted to be on the forefront of these things all the time. In 5 or 10 years, that forefront would have moved so much that the marginal gain of doing a better report or adding another vegan dish to your lunch, whatever, that's the marginal gain would be so low that it's not where we are anymore. But that's where we are now, like trying to push the limits a little bit on what we do. I'd like to talk a little bit about positioning, because I think that's an interesting area. Like you talk about, like today, what is new and works as a unique sales proposition
tomorrow maybe just by default something that consumers expect. And one example is, I think, if we look at Oslo and Norway, they've been very good at electrifying their entire infrastructure and setting that up. So it'd be interesting to hear how the different markets and how you guys position yourselves relative to the markets in that respect.
Yeah, So the Norwegian example is really, really interesting because obviously an electrical car is not something novel at all there. It's just the default almost now, at least all the new cars. So were we to enter Oslo or another Norwegian city, we would have probably still called ourselves GreenMobility and talked the green stuff, but it's not the electrical stuff. Maybe that's even an advantage because people are then more used to stuff like automatic gear, how do you charge a car, which are still like small barriers in the other cities. But we would probably be more communicative about the benefits of car sharing, like the congestion stuff, the air pollution that could come out of that by sharing, have fewer cars, and just like a better urban environments. It could have been more like the attack. But it is right to say that we are in the different cities are on different places on that curve, and we will have different things we need to address more or focus on in our positioning.
And how do you guys, in terms of like, I've talked about Oslo as a new market. How are you guys, like in terms of the growth strategy, like how is your messaging and positioning used as part of that? Like what are the value drivers that you guys play on when you go into a new market? Like you talk a little bit about there's some barriers in some markets because they're not used to automatic or charging, so you have to educate, versus other markets where they're like Oslo, where they're fully aware of the benefits, so you have to change the communication to match sort of the benefit in their sort of in that respect.
So in most of the cities where we launch, there is a competitive situation where we're the only one. There's only a handful of players in Europe doing what we're doing, and most of them are not expanding citywide right now. So in the cities we launch, it's either an active purpose choice that there's a competitor, fine, that we can live with that. Maybe it's even a synergy between that. Or we don't do a city where there's an intense competitive situation. So when we launch, it's very often that we need to like teach the audience what is car sharing even all about. And also in the cities where there's a competitive situation, let's say in Copenhagen, I think maybe 10-15% of the population would have an account with a car sharing company, and obviously very much fewer would drive on a daily basis. So there's still a huge potential. It's more like us and them against car ownership more than it's us against each other. But in new cities, we will have to teach people what car sharing is about. So that's more like I said, we're GreenMobility, but it's super cheap, it's easy, it's convenient, you can find them on the streets, this is how you park them, and blah, blah. And then on the onboarding flows, then we address the educational issues, like how do you do it, and what are the rules, and how do you drive with an automatic if you don't do that.
And can you speak a little bit about because you guys are like a relatively fast growing in terms of the number of cities and the places you're putting a flag down.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the strategy in which you're going into, or first of all, selecting those cities or markets? Sure. And then how you determine the best way to go into those markets?
Yeah. So deciding which cities to enter is like it has so many facets, so it's really, really difficult. And sometimes it's almost also just comes down to a hunch. But we do log, I can do like classic, almost business school kind of thing with an Excel sheet and a scoring and like all the different factors and how much would we give that. And out of that comes like a decision in the end or a suggestion. And within those decision trees, there are like anything from public charging infrastructure, maybe even subsidies if that's possible. Have you been invited by the municipality could be a positive sign relative to applying for a license, which could also be the opposite end of that spectrum. And also just like the consumers, like what's their competitive situation, even something as stupid as the Big Mac index, like what's their purchasing power there? Can we maintain a price point that's interesting? So there's a lot of things to consider. Could there be some partnerships to launch with? Is also an interesting thing for us. That's what we've been doing in Aarhus, for instance, with an energy company.
Can you explain a little bit more about the partnership and how that works?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a little detour there. Yeah, so in Aarhus, we were more or less invited to a talk with Energy, which is like the dominant energy company in Aarhus. that asked us if we were willing to open up shop in Aarhus, and that was the first new city outside of Copenhagen. So maybe that was like the trigger of that new strategy. That was before my time, so I don't know the entire story, but that's what I know. That partnership is basically them having subsidized a little bit of our launch there, but in exchange getting their name on the car sides, on the actual physical cars, and also just exchanging some consumers. So if there's a person in GreenMobility that has some need for an electric provider, that could be interesting, but also vice versa, very much vice versa, that their customer base could be invited to drive green.
And speaking of like the consumer side, when you guys actually select a market to go into, how do you guys then activate that market? So what are the sort of maybe, whether it's tactics or strategies to say, okay, now we've selected Aarhus or Antwerp or Berlin, how do we actually now tell the city that we exist? Like, what is your strategy for activating that way?
Yeah, so we're a classic consumer brand. So it will be an array or a mix of all the classical stuff that you would know, like a marketing mix towards consumers would consist of, anything from social media ads to what have you. But we have this added benefit of like this really physical representation of our business on the streets, being an outdoor advertisement for us, always there in the cars, of course, which is like a really, really interesting driver of attention. And also because it's such a physical representation of something new is in the city, that's always a good starting point for generating some PR and some buzz on that. So as soon as the cars are on the street, there's just an automatic interest switch that turns on. And that's really hugely beneficial for us. And then we start, very often at least, we have done some experiments with launching cities without that, but we do paid marketing, classic terms. And we have obviously an ad agency that helps us out. We have a media agency that helps with buying that, and obviously our in-house competencies as well. And that has been like anything from TV to big bus shelter campaigns outdoor when we launch cities to purely digital stuff. We've basically tried it all.
We also understand, like, based on your background with like sort of growth marketing side of things, like I think you guys also use like opportunity, like a needs analysis and opportunity mapping to also help identify, okay, where are the needs, like how do we actually go into these markets and communicate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I would love to own, and which I'm super envious of some of the big brands, is like a daily trigger of just thinking that brand. Like brushing your teeth would be Colgate, or for some people it would be cornflakes with the breakfast cereal, or whatever it could be. Just that you own this event on the day. It could be commuting for us, for instance, but it's super difficult to actually get that going. But one of the ways we can grow, which obviously we can get more consumers in, which is great. We can get more cars that will make it more convenient, but we can also get people to drive more. So our entire communication platform today, it's called Your City, Your Car, Din By, Din Bil, which is basically just trying to open up the city and the opportunities for you, like to inspire you and show you this is all the stuff you can also do. So what we're doing a lot is taking what we know some of our users are doing and telling that to everybody else. So you get this inspiration of saying, okay, I completely didn't know that you could take a car out for a night out in the city and having a restaurant and maybe a drink, and you can drive there, leave that car, and then take a taxi home. So you don't need to think about that. That's an eye opener for some people. For other people, it could be you can park the car easily at the airport. That's something as simple as that. So every time you go to the airport, you now take a GreenMobility car instead. And all these little, and there are probably in the thousands of different small use cases of our cars, we try to open that up and speak about that. So that's sort of the premise of the communications platform that we have.
Yeah. And how do you guys use different like data sources or insights tools to like work out, okay, what is important to people and how to actually use that data to then drive your communication? Or how do you do
Yeah,
that?
so that's a little bit more tricky, and I would say we're still in the early stages of being really good at that. But what we do have running is obviously the data from the usage of the cars, and we can track where they end the trip, where they start the trips, and of course all anonymized and aggregated and whatever. But we can see where things are happening, and that's something we're opening up a bit and looking more at to find out like what are the use cases. Like an example could be if there's a big event going on, a lot of cars will gravitate towards that. and could we have used that more intelligently in our communications and maybe incentivizing people to take a car to that event and stuff like that? Can we forecast stuff like that? That's one way. But also very directly, we just ask our users very often, like, what's going on to, like, in our day-to-day social media stuff. We ask questions when we send emails out. It could be a competition where you can send back, what have you experienced that was really cool in a car? But we also have more and more often, actually, we send out just a big survey questionnaire to all our users and get a lot of different feedback. Quite a long one, actually. And we get a lot of information back from that. So that's super important to learn what's going on there. But on the data side, where I think it's like, that's also my own background, where I'm really turned on about it, is like real marketing data, almost like these software as a service metrics, but on a consumer business. That's always been like my little thing, to look at cohorts and lifetime values and acquisition costs and stuff like that. But that's also something we've turned on and started tweaking our mixes towards, so we know we get more and more usage and we get the right lifetime value. And instead of just buying the cheapest acquisition cost, we are optimizing towards a better ratio between the two.
Okay. And do you guys, in terms of the consumer, do you see different segments or niches that you are like your primary audience that you then go into a market and say, okay, these are the guys we communicate with first because they are able to connect with the product on a higher level because of its purpose-driven approach? Or is it purely we go in and look at, okay, they're focused on convenience, so that's where we push and communicate that way? Like, how do you balance out your communication strategy that way?
Yeah, I mean, we try not to, and we haven't done much towards just finding the holiest segment we can or the greenest segment we can and just going after those, because I mean, their driving needs could be completely randomly different than the general population. So we're trying more to figure out, like, where do we have a really beneficial route or a use case that's really, really good, and then just hammering that in. So it could be a neighborhood, or it could be everybody we think are going to the airport. So in some of the other cities we're in, they also have airports that you need to go to, for instance. And we just know there's a lot of traffic on that specific line. So let's take that away from taxis if we can. And then we go after that. So that's more the way we look at it, rather than their like mindset positioning or segmentation. Is more like the use case segmentation.
And how, in terms of the vehicle choice and stuff like that, like we talked about at the beginning, that you guys have selected electric vehicles, like how much does that play into like consumers' preference at all? Like when consumers are looking for a green alternative, or is it primarily, like you said before, it's proximity to where I am? I'm 200 meters from the nearest car. If that's green, great. If it's not, then I'll go with one of your competitors or a taxi.
That mindset or that frame of looking at it is exactly how we think about it. Actually, it's, would you be willing to go a further distance to choose one of our cars for whatever reason? It could be green, it could be that you're a member of our subscription product where you get advantages or benefits or discounts. It could also be that you have a brand affinity to us, you just like us better. Could be many different things. Pricing, of course. Because we can't guarantee we're the nearest car always, and even in Copenhagen we have a little bit fewer cars than our direct competitor here, so chances are that you'll be nearer the other one, which is a funny thing as well. A lot of people will have both apps installed, or many people, when we ask them at least, so they choose that from convenience more than anything. So what can we do to make it more convenient or appear more convenient? And one of the things we launched just down that road is more or less everything we do is to make that bridge seem smaller. So we launched what we call pre-bookings, or you can get a car delivered to your address. So that's obviously a way of saying, if you know you're going to need a car, then we can ensure you don't have a long distance to go, and you'll choose ours, of course. Obviously working on price and discounts and vehicle types and all the other stuff. And now we've just recently launched what we call Green Saver, which is this subscription product to increase the loyalty and maybe hopefully make people think a little bit more about staying within GreenMobility instead of choosing a competitor when they're doing that.
And how much
and then the car, I just wanted to finish that with the cars, because I think that's really important as well. Electrical cars are not perfect in any way. I mean, they have a distance they can go, they have like battery that you need to consider, the charging infrastructure is getting better and better, but it's still not the same as just filling up your gasoline car, of course. The gas stations are everywhere. Charging infrastructure you need to think about. It takes a longer time to charge it. So there's a little bit more planning in that. So that means like longer trips or trips outside of the city can easily be done in electric cars, but there's still, like, first of all, some fear and some barriers, and then you're inside. So it's very much to try to get people to do that the first time, and then they keep on doing it because they figure out, okay, it's not that difficult, but there are some things that you need to change your behavior around. And we have a fleet of pretty much only Renault Zoes and then some vans, also electrical vans, of course. But it could be that you needed a larger car. It could be you needed a car with a longer range. It could be that you needed whatever. And that's something we're also trying to make the convenience on that part better. So I think in the future, we'll probably be looking at adding more car types.
And how much of like a friction audit do you guys do in that respect? Like you talked about like pre-delivery, which is obviously removing the friction of, okay, now I have to go find a car.
Yeah.
But how much is that a focus for you guys, like that, like sort of auditing that friction?
Yeah, it's not in any way structured to look at it that way. I like the approach, like a friction analysis is a great way to look at it. We do, and it is a goal. I think everybody in the business has been working with products, especially digital products, know that every time you add a little bit of friction, both digitally and offline, when an offline product like ours is there, that's just a conversion killer. And if you just take off 1% conversions in 10 steps, that's a huge loss that you could have had. So that's something we're working on constantly, but we have a lot of limitations, and like, do we focus there and that? So we're in no way perfect on that axis, but it is a way we're looking at it, but not in a structured enough way.
Cool. In terms of like when we look at like where you guys are today, how is owning the consumer, like we talked a little bit about this, like that ownership of the consumer and the customer, how important is that to you guys in terms of like growing the business and also just fending off competitors and also manufacturers coming into the marketplace, like some of your competitors?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reiterate that I think the competitive landscape is still very much all car sharers against car ownership, or all car sharers against the old habits, more than we having to fend off users between each other. I mean, so expanding the mass market is what we're predominantly doing, all of us. And that will fall into a distribution of the market share underneath, but it's still so much better than trying to steal each other's customers. So that's predominantly what's happening. So that's it. That's the important thing. Yeah, I think I forgot what you were asking more than that.
Yeah, and more the like the ownership of the customer. Like we talked about, like how important is it to have that customer facing component versus just being a supplier or manufacturer?
Yeah, exactly. So now I understood. So that's one of the big, I would say, strategic gambles here, or things that you should believe in by doing a business like ours. And that is 10 years from now, let's say, or 20, you would have manufacturers having a lot less to do because car sharing is more prominent, so fewer cars are needed. The cars that are being built are probably more self-driving, or at least partially that. They could even deliver themselves to your doorstep, maybe even. So that takes away a lot of the way people get transported to be completely different. And then the gamble is, would Tesla or whoever invents this self-driving car be better at getting an app in the hands of the consumers that they would open up every day to do their transportation needs? Or would the apps, say us, say Uber, say Lyft, whatever they can be called, be better at adding self-driving producers' cars into that existing infrastructure and just making a little bit of a different behavior than you need to do today to book it? And that's it. I don't think like there's a supply chain that'll just go to both ends. Like there's a winner in that end and there's a winner in that end. And that's the strategic gamble. And obviously myself and a lot of investors and a lot of smart people included and all Uber's investors and whatever you have would be gambling on there's a good place to be very close to the consumer ownership, or fending off their attention somewhere else. But there's also a very good place to be as a manufacturer to get the right car. And reaching both those ends, I think, will be very, very difficult. And that's what some of our competitors are trying to do because they're owned by car producing companies. But we'll see. But I think it's really, really important to be close to the consumer. So that's what we're trying to do, like be a little bit agnostic about the car. That's the tool. That's what's getting you from A to B. But it's the entire experience, and it's the ease of use, it's the friction we can remove that's more important in it.
Perfect. All right, I've got a couple of questions from the audience.
Great.
I've got M, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. How much better is it to produce an electrical car rather than a gasoline car? As far as I have heard, the process of making a battery for an electric car is not the most environmentally friendly.
Yeah, that's part of the decisions from choosing which car we have. And that's one of the reasons Renault Zoe was chosen. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's 118 grams better per kilometer in CO2 emissions with a Renault Zoe compared to an average gasoline car. So that's one thing. And part of the cradle to grave cycle of a car is super important. Obviously, batteries are in itself a pollutant. If you just throw it on a Indian garbage dump, that's not a good thing to do. But they're quite aware of that, and I think it's maybe 80%, and that's the number I can't remember perfectly, but it's in that vicinity of a Renault Zoe is actually made of reused parts from other cars in the Renault group, like reused in a way where it's been on the street before.
Okay.
So that should be really, really beneficial on the CO2 emissions. But I completely agree, and there's been debate for years about that, and I'm not this expert. I'm just taking what the current state of the affairs are, and maybe at some point we will be looking at electrical cars differently in that aspect. But on an ongoing usage basis, it's better not to do gasoline stuff where you actually do a little bit of an explosion every time in the engine rather than generating the electricity from wind power or whatever it could be.
Makes sense. And then I've got second question, out of curiosity, do you have any plans/aspirations to make electrical airplanes to replace the small domestic flight routes in Denmark, for example?
That would be amazing. We do have a partnership with these seaplanes that are in the harbor, actually, in Copenhagen and Aarhus. I mean, they're not electrical, but I know they have some ambitions in trying to see if that can happen. So it will not be us doing it, but that would be cool. But what we could see ourselves doing is other vehicle types. I mean, there's no God-given truth that the car as a format should be the ideal way of transportation yourself in 50 years. So if we want to play the long game, that could easily be anything else. So a flying car, maybe.
Perfect. All right. And then I think the only other thing would be, do you have any final words or advice for green enterprises in today's market in terms of what you guys or what you've learned within GreenMobility that you would think would be?
Oh yeah, there are some. I think the first one to look at is if you're a brand manager or a C-level person in a company thinking about the green stuff or sustainability in a different way. I think it's really important to see, first of all, is there a way you can integrate it into your core product that doesn't make it more expensive, or it's not adding, do you want to climate offset this journey for 50 kroner in your checkout, and nobody can check what's going on with that money anyway. It is trying to make it part of the core. And I think we all know that the ecology boom in the Danish supermarkets, that really took off when the prices hit the same level as the alternatives. So people are not really willing, they're saying a lot, and maybe a small segment will be willing to, but most mass market consumers or businesses will choose convenience and price. So make sure that the green part is something that's actually a driver of your value instead of an add-on that makes a cost on it. And also, I would say, from my own perspective, both a consumer and a buyer of a lot of stuff, B2B as a marketer, it's really, really easy to see through when it's just like a little layer you put on top of your messaging. I think the time has left being able to just brand your way into greenness. There needs to be some actual stuff inside.